Hey guys, this is Zach McClure,
Alex Huddleston.
And Evan Greenhill.
and today I would do a long rant about what our subject is, but all I really need to say is video games as movies.
I'm out.
Bye, Evan.
He actually went up the stairs.
Nice.
And we're back.
Where'd you get those clothes?
Magic. Magic of audio.
We can do anything.
Exactly.
So this is our second ever podcast. Our first one was actually rather successful.
Yay.
All 45 views,
Yes!
at this current time at least.
So I viewed the first one like 43 times.
Oh god,
See, so,
damn it!
and I viewed it the last like 2 times, so...
Wait, what?
Zach, why didn't you view our podcast?
I had
You
to edit it.
jerk.
Fuck you.
You don't believe in the cause?
No, I don't. So, first and foremost, what is the main distinction between video games and movies? In your opinion, at least.
Interaction. Most
Interaction.
likely.
Yeah.
But what about those movies that you, like, play along with board games?
Yeah, that's dumb, and we're not talking about them.
Those movies suck.
But yeah, there's a lot of kids movies out there that are very interactive and that talk to the kids and stuff. But
Yeah, there are a lot of movies that like to point to the screen and say, "Can you say ball?" But I don't think those are going to win any Oscars.
you never know, actually.
Yeah.
It's,
The little red ball that could may very well take Best Picture this year.
I
I'm
think it
looking at you, Shyamalan.
should be when the movie says, "Can you say ball?" If the kid doesn't say ball, the guy on the screen should get mad at them. Told you to say ball! You little shits. Oh, can't work with these kids. And he just storms off. Movie finishes.
So, moving beyond interaction, are there any other main distinctions that you can think of?
Well, and not really. I mean, the beautiful thing about video games, at least in the current age, is that they become more cinematic, so you can really tell any kind of story you want in them. And I think at the beginning it would have been the stories that you tell with video games are different from the stories that typically you tell with movies. At least during like the 8-bit era, the Atari era, when it was very hard to, display complex things on screen.
Yeah, and definitely during the 8-bit and 16-bit era, and even earlier, you could get away with a lot more ridiculous stuff. And there's kind of an idea nowadays even that you could get away with a lot of stuff that you could never really get away with in movies.
Yeah.
Like
Well, it's just because games are a fresher media, Movies are, at this point, they're over 100 years old. Whereas video games and how we currently understand them have really only been around for 25 years tops?
yeah, and really, like, if you were to see a fresh movie with the same storyline as Devil May Cry,
Yeah.
you consider that one of the worst pieces of shits ever.
Yeah.
Well, to be perfectly fair, I consider most of the storytelling in Devil May Cry to be backseat material anyway.
Yeah.
I've never been a huge fan of the actual cutscenes and stories of it. It's all about the hack and slash gameplay.
That is another big difference between games and movies, and that, for the most part, movies generally don't scrape by without at least putting in effort towards the story,
Yeah.
You always hear about, there's all these action movies nowadays, and the story's crap, but all they care about is the explosions. But that's taken to a whole new level in games sometimes.
No lie.
Yeah, there are literally games out there that do have stories, but you could read a review of them and they would literally never mention the story.
Yeah.
Could you honestly name distinctions between the last 3 Mario games?
You mean the one where he went to space, or the
second one where he went to space.
Oh, the second one where he went to space.
What about
For
the third one?
entirely different
He
reasons.
goes into space.
There's no third one where he goes in space. There's a third one where he dresses up as a raccoon.
No, that's the second time he's dressed up as a raccoon, at least.
He dresses up as a raccoon a lot. Mario's probably a furry.
Mario has a lot of problems.
Yeah, he does. He has some stuff he has to take care of on his own.
Hey man, you spend all your times in the sewers of a magical kingdom, you'll have a few issues yourself,
Yeah. So, I guess to start off with, what are some of the first video game movies that you can think of?
The first one I've ever seen is still probably one of my favorites, and it actually is The Super Mario Brothers movie.
Such a bad movie.
It's terrible. It's absolutely awful. But I cannot get enough of watching it. It's bad in all the right ways. It's like it's 80s bad, and 80s bad is always good bad.
Right, like hair metal.
Exactly.
And you know what? Along the similar lines, I do enjoy the first Mortal Kombat movie.
Oh yeah.
That's an awful movie too.
Have you seen Annihilation?
Yes, and I liked Annihilation when I was a kid.
Well, generally, whenever I think of a video game movie, I just instinctively gravitate towards Uwe Boll, or however you pronounce his name.
Uwe Boll.
Uwe Boll.
Shitty McShit? Yeah.
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 That's probably what it translates
All three
to.
of us naturally gravitate towards acknowledgeably shitty movies.
Well, I mean, thankfully, I've never actually sat down and watched one of his films. I've watched clips of like Blood Rain and stuff, and that's enough.
Yeah.
That was enough to give you a bad case of diarrhea. That's powerful work for a movie.
Yeah, definitely.
That movie is literally the brown note.
Yeah.
It's one brown note that goes on for 3 movies.
I mean, I could forgive it for a lot of that stuff, but it just had to take a giant dump all over Ben Kingsley's career.
Oh.
It had to do that, which is such a shame, and is really, I think, becoming more and more of a kind of common thing, especially with edgier media lately, which video game movies I would consider part of.
Yeah.
Is that when they're bad, people try to get involved in them anyway, like well-known actors and everything, and it ends up just completely obliterating whatever they've been working on.
Yeah. Probably one of the earlier ones that we can mention, and it's kind of in a gray area, but there's always Tron, which is in a way a video game movie.
It's a movie about the video game world.
And that's a hard distinction to make sometimes, because when you talk about video game movies, do you talk only about the adaptions, or do you talk about like movies that are based on video games, like Tron or The Wizard?
Right.
California. Yeah. Well, I mean, Tron. I have watched Tron a lot of times. Personally, as a kid, I loved it. As an adult, it's okay, but it kind of wanes on you. It's very thin, I think.
Yeah.
I liked the new film, but it was the exact same thing. I didn't think that it was a bad story. It was just not a strong story, and it didn't seem to warrant the kind of work that was put into it.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a big issue with a lot of video game films. I think the Resident Evil film franchise is particularly bad on the aspect of, okay, we have this really cool franchise that deals with this, idea that's been done hundreds of times in every kind of media possible. What can we do with it? Well, we can throw a lot of CGI at it. Okay.
CGI fixes all problems.
That's where the meeting ends.
Yeah. So, get on that subject a little bit. With video game movies.
I think the biggest problem with video game movies, I really think that's hard to establish. I think one of the problems I have with it the most is trying to please the fans. Because when you're working with a pre-existing franchise, there's always going to be people who are going to scrutinize what you're doing.
Yes.
And I think the biggest obstacle that a lot of filmmakers work when they're doing video game movies is that they try to squeeze in as many references as they can, but they try to interpret it in weird ways, and people get scared of the idea of changing it too much, and so they limit themselves creatively, and it ends up weakening what they're working on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, in my opinion, the biggest issue with video game movies is, and I don't want to derail the conversation too much, is the fact that video games are not really accepted as an art form.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So, if you take a movie that's an adaptation of a book, or even a movie that's an adaptation of a TV show, there's some feeling going into it that this source material is art in its own right, and you have to do right by it. You have to treat it that way. But with video games, there's none of that. It's just a fucking video game. We'll throw in some shit that the gamers will like, and boom, it'll eat it up at the box office.
Yeah.
I think it's the same issue we see with comic book movies. In that, right about when the first Christopher Nolan Batman film came out, pretty much every comic book movie was stupid, slapdash, In the same category as a video game movie. People just didn't give a shit because it was, it's comic books. The only people that read those are nerds. They're not art,
Yeah.
Yeah. And at that time, like, the comic book movie was starting to change a little bit already.
Yeah.
Because you had, back in 2000, was the release of, I don't know when the first Spider-Man came out, but I know X-Men came out, and that was considered a big change from movies of the past.
Well, I mean, all we really had at that point, up until then, was we had what was it? We had Batman, the Tim Burton one, which was good, but it was still, it was an art film. It was artsy movies, which of course it's Tim Burton.
Well, the first Batman wasn't very artsy. It was the second Batman where you had like the penguin.
The second Batman got crazy.
Was
and
that
I mean, like,
with the suit nipples?
No, that was the fourth one.
Yeah.
Which that was something else entirely, but that's when you're trying to pander to children. The second one was Tim Burton's last one to do, and I mean that's where we saw Christopher Walken with white hair.
Ah, that one.
And that in itself should explain what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. But still, yeah, so that's the exception that proves the point, is that every once in a while you still get someone who comes along, and when they care and respect the material they're basing it off of, they can try to make something that stays, pretty true and still pretty good in and of itself. But when they don't give a shit about the material they're basing it off of, the movie's gonna suck as a result.
Yeah.
So it's the same with video game films, in my opinion.
Yeah, and one of the main issues I do see with that is the view of a video game when adapting it to a movie, is that when filmmakers look at it, they think they have to make a video game movie. They think they have to try and grasp the same feeling of a video game in a movie, which you can't do.
Well, that's how you get the freaking first-person camera shot in the Doom movie.
Yeah.
You don't need that in there. We all accept that Doom was one of the first-person shooters. You don't need to reference that. And it kind of weakens the movie as a whole.
See, I didn't mind that because an homage is okay. But when you're trying to like base an entire movie off of like almost like gameplay aspects, like
that's actually, I don't want to interrupt here, but this sounds really familiar in that you guys have heard the World of Warcraft movie, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah, I haven't heard much about it.
The guy who's finally directing that and hopefully going to try and bring it to fruition and stuff, he has a quote that I feel is really relevant here. He says, excuse me. He says, "I think we're waiting for the right project. I definitely think there's an intangible aspect of video games in that a film is never going to capture. But that's not what a game adaptation needs to be. A good game adaptation is where you find the story or the emotional aspect that's the heart of a computer game, and you replicate that on film."
Which is exactly...
Oh, yes.
Which I was going to say is exactly what I think.
Right.
When you take a step back and view a video game as just another form of storytelling, then I think you can really get down to what could make a good video game movie. And that's just something a lot of people are missing. It seems something so simple that a lot of people could do, but they don't. And I think that's mostly because of studio interference, but...
Well, I wouldn't... my personal favorite quote is, "Never attribute to malice what you can attribute to incompetence." I don't think it's necessarily so much a fact of the movie studios doing this. It's mere a fact of the people making the movies have their own biases and stuff that they're bringing into it.
Yeah, and that's definitely an aspect that could be researched and probably found to be pretty true.
Yeah.
Well, especially when you consider one of the biggest video game directors is Uwe Boll.
Yeah.
I mean, his whole bias seems to be what looks cool. Okay. Go with it.
It's what
Yeah.
looks cool.
What looks cool. Yeah.
Oh, they don't like my movie? I will punch them in
I
the face.
will knock them out. That will prove that I am great director.
Directing is based off of beasts. This is true in Sweden.
Well, you ask some people. Look at Alfred Hitchcock. He bullied his cast into something serious.
Yeah, he gave them nervous breakdowns.
And he got some of the best movies there are out of that genre out of it.
Yeah, and to bring it back around,
Yeah.
there are some pretty good stories in video games. It's just, again, going back to the art form thing, and that's a big discussion in and of itself.
Yeah.
Like where video games rely on art. And the big thing is nobody takes video games seriously, and that's starting to change recently, especially with that game company, which is of course the name of the game company.
Man, they picked it well.
Who did three games for the PSN network called Flow, Flower, and Journey.
Yeah,
Journey. Oh my god, dude.
it's a beautiful aspect of games, just sort of as an atmospheric experience.
Yeah, and people talk a lot about Journey, but I actually haven't played Journey, but I have played Flower.
Flower was good.
Flower was an amazingly beautiful game.
I haven't played either of those. What I have played is Flow.
So you had one person play Flow, one person play Flower, and one person play
There you go.
Journey.
I mean, it was really just a really cool idea. There's a definitive goal to them, but with most video games, what you're doing is, okay, my goal is to get to the castle, defeat the Turtle King, and rescue the princess. You know,
But
that's the aspect of it. But these games were about
The atmosphere.
how you got there, what you did. It was about the journey, not the destination.
But that's just exactly it. In that part of the reason that Flow, Flower, and Journey are so incredible is because they go in and they explore the very concept of interactivity.
Yeah.
How you're able to interact with this world by limiting your interactions to specific ways and then affecting to those ways. They make an incredible video game that could almost certainly never be ported over to any other form of media.
Yeah. It's distinct to its original source.
You could never write a book about Journey. It just wouldn't be
You
possible.
could, it wouldn't be very good.
Yeah, and actually, you know what Journey reminded me a lot of is an old animated short called The Snowman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you made something like that adapted from Journey, it would probably be quite beautiful. Because it's and for people who don't remember The Snowman, it was made in like 30s, 40s. Like it was made pretty early, wasn't it?
It was later than that.
Was it? Okay, it was an earlier film, completely no dialogue, and it was about a kid making a snowman and flying around with him.
I think it was foreign, wasn't it?
It might have been.
Anyway, but that and it was, and the beautiful thing about that particular short film was the aspect of sound and how it affected how the story was told. Because I mean, like the entire time that's going on, all you're just hearing is this beautiful. I think, if I remember correctly, it was just all like piano stuff.
Yeah,
and
I was way off. It was 1983.
Yeah, and it was made in London.
It was 1982 for the original, then 1983 for David Bowie version.
What?
Nice.
That's amazing.
Oh, David.
We need to do a podcast about that. Just that. But I mean, and I think as time goes by, we'll begin to see a lot more good aspects of cinematography in video games, as well as things that can be carried over. Like, what was it? The new Uncharted, like 3, Drake's Fortune, was that it?
Uncharted 3.
There's the scene where you're walking through the desert.
Yeah.
And you're literally, the aspect of it is that you're walking through the desert while dialogue is going off. And there's, what I found really cool about that scene and why I think it played really well to the atmosphere of the game is that there's no clear goal. I mean, you understand that Drake has to get through this desert, but there's no real way that you can see to conceive such a goal. So you're literally just walking and taking in what's going on in the game. And I thought that was a really interesting way to play that particular part of it, instead of just playing it as a cutscene.
And to mention... you can go ahead.
I was going to say, that leads me to, personally, in my opinion, the entire basis of this discussion is, should video game movies exist, or something like that. And I think that example right there perfectly illustrates why they should. In that a lot of people are well aware, video games, they're interactive, they can do things that movies can't. But people don't really think about the fact that movies can do things that video games can't.
Yeah.
Video game companies don't think about this fact. That's why we get games like Xenogears, or not, Xenosaga, which personally I loved, but it had hour-and-a-half-long cutscenes.
Yeah.
It tried to be a movie, and it wasn't. It's a game. There are things that a movie can do that a game can't. So even though that sounds... I've never played the newest Uncharted. Even though that sounds like an amazing sequence, and they may have done interesting things with it, the fact that a video game, which is supposed to be about interacting and you controlling a character, just has you plodding through a desert sounds boring as hell to me. It sounds like a waste of potential. Sounds like they were trying to get a movie atmosphere out of something which is obviously not a movie.
Which I have played it, and it's a very interesting, it's a very interesting piece of the game because it's just after a plane crash, and you're kind of wandering around the desert trying to find water.
Nice.
It's actually a really good part of the game. But what I was going to mention about Uncharted is the interesting thing about it is if you were to pick a game to adapt into a movie, Uncharted is what I would consider probably one of the top ones. Not because of it's a good game, because it is a good game. It's a fantastic game, and I've always been a fan of it since it came out, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But the big thing about it is the story is really solid, and the game is based very heavily around the story.
Well, one of the things I think would make a great argument as to why I think Uncharted would make a great movie series is because so much of it seems pulled from the film media. I mean, you can draw so many parallels between Nathan Drake and Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It almost seems like they're directly trying to reference that.
Exactly.
And there have been some somewhat controversial statements, and that's controversy with quotes around it.
Controversy with a K.
That because some people have said that they consider Drake to be the new Indiana, and their reasoning behind that is Indiana was based off the old Western serials that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas
watched as kids. Yeah.
And Drake is based off the old movies that the creators watch as kids, which is Indiana Jones.
There you go.
Yeah.
So his creation and aspects of him are done in the same way, and he was built in the same way that Indiana Jones was built. So in that respect, then yeah, he kind of is the new Indiana Jones. He's not the same character, really.
Well, that's why we have the word spiritual successor, or words.
Yeah.
And they have been planning a movie, and of course it's being, from the early drafts of the script, it's being extremely mishandled.
Oh, yeah.
But that just comes with the territory sometimes.
That's part of it.
It sucks that it comes with the territory, but when you kind of have these things, they hand them off to people that the studio doesn't take them seriously. That's the big problem.
Well, I'm not sure which way I would like that, because the two arguments you could have is either you have a studio handle a video game franchise story-wise, or you have the video game franchise trying to make a movie. And when you do that, I think you get something close to Resident Evil Degeneration or FF7 Advent Children, which were just... they weren't worth it.
But on the other side, you have some of they weren't well-reviewed, but they weren't badly reviewed. Like the Halo game. The Halo game.
The Halo movie.
Yeah.
And you have some newer things which are being made that actually are kind of better reviewed.
Yeah,
because they're starting to realize that there is a crossover in this situation. And you actually mentioned the game companies handling it when they announced the first Metal Gear Solid movie. Which when you mentioned Xenogears earlier, I did want to mention that they're the same complaints about.
Metal Gear Solid 4?
Yes, that's their really long cutscenes.
The entire game is a cutscene.
Yeah.
Yeah, they call it Video Game the Movie, which is complete bullshit because Heavy Rain exists. But anyway, they recently announced that they were going to start work on the Metal Gear Solid movie, and Hideo Kojima is the executive producer.
Oh man, that's going to end well.
Oh, it's going to be crazy! I cannot wait to see the advertising campaign.
But but the producer that they hired is actually skilled. It's the same producer for like the Avengers.
Right on.
Oh, nice.
So they got someone who actually knows how to make like a good action movie.
Mm-hmm.
How that translates into Metal Gear Solid, which is ostensibly a stealth action, remains to be seen.
Well, that's just like we were just saying. You don't have to try and put the gameplay in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though Metal Gear Solid, the series, has been about stealth action, doesn't mean you have to try to make it a stealth action movie. You know?
Yeah, and Metal Gear Solid's always been based on the story. Even back in the in the 8-bit era, it was still heavily based
Yeah.
on the story.
Well, I mean, and I think that's actually an argument as to why we need why it's a good idea to make video games movies. Because when you're playing a video game, the story, for the most part, usually takes a backseat to the gameplay. So when you adapt that to a film, you don't have to worry about the gameplay, and you have an option in this media that's allowed and really created to make the story come out and shine.
I would disagree. I think that what you're describing is more a mishandling of a video game. In that when someone thinks that the story can take a back seat, they're usually doing it wrong, you know?
Oh, of course, I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. I'm just saying that seems to be, at least, especially like earlier before these past couple of years, that's I think how a lot of people handled it. So you have a lot of games that could make great movies that haven't been explored as much as they could have been.
So we're going to take a quick break here, and then we're going to come back and talk about something that's actually a little bit related to this.
All right.
And we're back. So to kind of talk about something related to it, let's flip the coin. Let's talk about movies made with video games.
Movies made with video games. You're
Machinima.
talking about like Machinima.
And yes, Machinima is actually the biggest example of it.
Okay.
I thought machinima was the word for it.
Well,
Or you mean
yeah,
like machinima.com, the actual...
well, there's that, and there's the idea of Machinima, and there could be other examples.
There actually is one, I think, really good example. You guys remember the Futurama video game, right?
No.
Nope. Okay.
Yes, actually I do.
There was a Futurama video game, and I rented it and played it. I really couldn't get past the second level. It was playable, but it was kind of broken. But one thing really cool that's come out is the actual, I think it was actually the company that makes Futurama, took the different cutscenes from the game and put them all together, and it actually forms an entirely cohesive story you can watch with very little explanation, and it forms an entire lost episode of Futurama.
Huh.
Interesting.
That's neat.
But Machinima is the main one. It's like, I'd say 90% of the subject. But there are also other things that you could argue.
Mhm.
There's Sprite movies, of course, which is you yeah, don't really like them either. But there are stuff that's made using video game assets.
There's a phenomenon actually occurring right now on the internet, especially like on YouTube and stuff, for people who want to get the story from games, but not without having to play them, or that aren't able to play them, where a person will take cutscenes and crucial parts of the gameplay and edit them together and call it like, Tomb Raider the movie or Uncharted the movie, stuff like that.
That just seems kind of like a degradation of a Let's Play.
It really does, but that's just another aspect of how you get the media out there.
Actually, I can probably say where that might have come from. I won't say for sure, but there is, if you go and play Metroid Other M, and you go to the theater mode, there is a play all section, and what it'll do it will actually make Other M the movie, where it will do exactly that.
The only movie no one wants
Nice.
to watch.
And will actually, like, when it gets to the gameplay scenes, it'll actually the computer will actually speed through it, and like it will start in boss fights. It will start the fight. It'll do like our first few shots, and then it'll just cut to the cutscene at the end.
Wow. That's really clever.
And yeah, I've heard of that. And actually, the earlier example is probably when they came out with Metal Gear Solid 3. They came out with a special edition called Subsistence. And one of the special discs in like Europe was called a disc called Persistence, and it had all the cutscenes cut together as a movie. It was called Metal Gear Solid Snake Eater the movie. And yeah, so that's another example of taking basically the video game, making a movie out of it. Though it's kind of a lazy example because you're quite literally just taking the cutscenes,
Taking the game and turning it into a movie, removing the game aspect of it.
And I wouldn't be surprised if videos that you found were actually made by the game companies.
Really?
Because, yeah, like Other M did, and fucking...
Well, it's entirely possible.
Who makes Other M? Ninja Studios or something?
I believe so, yes.
Ninja Studios and Konami did it, so you would expect after two big companies did it, you'd have a bunch of copycats. But yes, the big example is Machinima. And the biggest Machinima is probably
Red versus Blue.
Red versus Blue.
Yeah.
Yep, got to be Rooster Teeth.
Yeah, and that just brings up the thing that it is a comedy. Like you can't watch like Red vs. Blue and see like
Consider
one
it
episode
serious.
And
Yeah.
it's serious at all.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a double-edged sword. Wherein whenever anybody else makes machinima, do you make it comedy or do you make it serious?
That's I think up to the person who does it. I would say that there is the potential to make probably a really good, compelling story with things like Machinima, because I've seen a few Minecraft movies in my day, and they some of them can touch on interesting ideas. They're usually poorly acted. I wouldn't recommend making a serious Machinima. Put it that way.
Yeah, because
I think the biggest issue with that is that a lot of times in something like film or in any art that you're trying to go into, a big part of it is finding something new or finding something interesting to let the medium do.
Yeah.
That's why the good directors are the ones that do something with a camera that nobody's done before. When you make a machinima, you're restricting yourself in what you can do. And so a lot of times the best machinimas are the comedies because you can gain unintentional comedy from what the game will and won't let you do. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and
By exploiting game mechanics, you can glean humor out of stuff and make interesting, compelling stuff, you know.
you went to a robot there for a second.
Guys?
Okay,
Yeah, we're
you're
here,
good.
man. Yeah.
Oh, no.
What's going? Everything okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Sorry.
Okay, but yeah, and along with that issue, the other issue is the always present trendsetter, where when a major thing happens to a genre, it sets the trend for following things, and then a viewer will always have that in the back of their mind. Like today,
Right.
today you probably can't make a comedy involving clowns because of it.
Yeah.
Well, clowns always have been inherently scary, you know?
Yeah,
It just demonstrated it.
definitely.
Well, but the trendsetter, you see that trope, I think, especially a lot in pop music. The idea of one artist mimicking another or trying to be the next like
Lady
version
Gaga.
of Lady Gaga. Yeah.
You got the Lady Gaga and the Nicki Minaj is following them.
Yeah.
The Nicki Minaj and the Kesha and the Katy Perry.
And yeah, so the mixture of the game assets limiting you and the trendsetters in the serious aspect of it kind of ruined Machinima.
Huh.
But I'm saying that in that there really wasn't much to ruin in the first place because
Yeah.
while interesting, it's extremely limited. Like you could probably line up 3 Machinimas from the same game, and I could not tell you the difference between them. And the only reason I could tell Red versus Blue from the other ones is because I think starting like season 8, they started doing their own animation.
They did. They have a full animation team now.
Yes.
It's actually really slick.
Yeah, because
They got the guy who animated the Dead Fantasy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Monty Oum.
Monty Oum. Yep.
yeah, and that leads to another thing. What would those be considered? The Dead Fantasies and
It's video game films, man.
what was one of them?
Yeah.
It was like Samus versus Master Chief.
Metroid versus Halo, something like that.
Yep. And that they're not using video game assets, but they're trying to gain the look of video game assets and touch upon the video game stories and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So, to hop back on video games as movies for a second, do you think there is something that could make video game movies better?
Well, yeah, but I think that's like saying, do you think there's something that can make movies better? I think it's kind of isolated for each one, because you have video game films that are better than others, and you have ones that are just god awful. I don't really know if I could place on anything in particular that separates that aspect from regular films and what you could do to improve them.
Yeah, and that also comes down to the question of, should video game movies even be considered its own genre or subgenre?
It's adaptation. I mean,
Yeah.
it's adaptation. If you can make a film based off of a book and call it the film based off of a book, you can make a film based off of a video game and do the same.
Yeah. And I think it came down to the reason it is considered like its own little genre is almost accidental, because it feels like the only reason that people even like put the title video game movie on something is because there was a very long line starting from, I think, like Super Mario Brothers movie to like nowadays that the label is inherently connected to bad.
Well, I think it's more niche marketing. I mean, I think the reason that video game movies began was because somebody wanted to cater to a specific group. And that's why they have the genre labeled as video game movies.
Yeah, but then you have the bad ones, and soon the label starts being connected to it.
But I don't think that was inherently part of the process so much as it was
that's what I'm saying. It is it's an after.
Right.
Yeah. A symptom.
Yeah, it's just like how...
Which gets right back into, if people don't respect video games as an art form, how can they respect video game movies?
Yeah.
As nothing more than just a cheap
knockoff of the original product.
Exactly.
And do you think, and I think the best final question is, do you think we'll ever see good video game movies in the future?
Yeah, definitely. I've seen some that I consider good. I like what was it? I saw the Professor Layton film, which was actually an animated film from Japan, was very good. I think honestly, if I didn't know that the video game franchise of Professor Layton existed, I would have put it up on this, mantle as its own kind of franchise and been excited about the next one.
Yeah. I've also heard good things about the Phoenix Wright movie.
I actually watched that last night, and I enjoyed it. I didn't like the beginning. It started off kind of trying to push the aspect that this is based off of a previous kind of franchise that's very big on goofiness and things that wouldn't happen in reality. Like you have scenes where people are shocked, and this one guy literally grabs his hair and rips it off his head out of pure surprise. Or
I wouldn't say that's necessarily based on the video game. That's just the way that the Phoenix Wright series is.
Yeah,
and
they're trying to pull the atmosphere of that. But it got really good. I couldn't find myself unable to just like walk away from it. I wanted to see how it ended, and I think that particularly is a sign, I think, of a good film.
Yeah, and for a very long time, there's definitely been a line between video games and movies, and crossing over has always kind of raised eyebrows, especially from when a studio would try and make a game. It would usually fail, save, of course, for the brief period in from I think like Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis to the end of the PS1 era, where Disney would make games and they would actually make good games.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is the line is actually starting to be blurred more now, because there's been one major video game release lately that has really blurred that line, and that is Studio Ghibli's Ni no Kuni.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
That is a video game developed by a movie studio.
An incredibly well-respected movie studio.
Oh, yeah.
And it, from all reports, I haven't played it personally, but from all reports and from what I've seen of the game, it's beautiful and very well.
And see, I never for a minute doubted that would happen, because Studio Ghibli, from the stories I've heard of, first of all, of Hayao Miyazaki as just a director, and as the studio as a whole, they seem to really care about what they produce on a level different from what you'd see from most like mass media kind of markets. So I didn't for a minute suspect that it would be anything other than a genuinely good experience, because it seems like they're the kind of company that would do all they can to pay respect to what they were trying to create.
Yeah, and they're
yeah, definitely.
And that brings me back to my point that I was talking about respect and stuff like that. And I think that's one of the reasons why we rarely, at least in the West, we don't really see a whole lot of good video game movies, and why it gives me hope that we will in the future.
Yeah.
In that, well, like you said, with the movie that's coming out, and they've got the video game guy making the movie, and he's bringing in someone else to handle the production. I don't think that's going to work out too well. I don't have high hopes for that, because he's going to be treating it like a video game, and the movie guy is going to be treating it like a movie, and neither of them are really going to be thinking about both sides completely, you know? You have these filmmakers who go into it and say, okay, I'm going to make a video game movie, but they're bringing in all their biases of movie making. And then you have these video game directors who try to make their video games more like movies, but they're bringing in all their biases of video games. You need somebody that's a synthesis of both. One person to take creative control as the director or as the producer or whatnot, who has a foot in both worlds. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and what I think with especially some recent video game productions with the Uncharted series, with that game company making some very artistic games, and especially with games like Ni no Kuni being made by movie companies, as the line gets more blurred, you may start people might actually be able to start seeing both sides of the coin now, because before there were two separate things, and you would only be able to see the positives of one side or the other side. And when they crossed over, it was basically considered like early comic book adaptations.
Yeah.
You can only take it so seriously. And that brings me to the point of, and it's always the point brought up by people, and it's kind of cliche to say, but before we can really take them seriously, we need our Dark Knight. we need a Dark Knight movie for video games before it can be taken seriously at all.
I'll give it time.
And
we had a Dark Knight video game. Does that count? Oh well, it was Batman Begins.
Yeah. and there's a reason I didn't say Batman Begins, because A, I didn't see it.
Oh, that's a shame, man.
And B, it wasn't as effective to video game, or it was as effective to comic book movies as
the Dark Knight was.
Yeah.
Yes.
They just need somebody who can take a look at the source material he's using and find something inherent in it that can make a good story. And that's the biggest thing I can always say about video game movies. Don't treat it like a video game movie.
Treat it like a movie.
Treat it like a story.
There you go.
If you're going to, if The Hobbit was a video game, then it would not have gotten the press it gotten. But
yeah. See the epic movie based on the PlayStation 2 video game that sold 1,000 copies.
But yeah, no, it's all about learning what can be done, what a movie is about, what a game is about, and treating both materials as they are.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I think a lot of it goes into the aspect of what you can do versus what you should do.
Yeah, and I think the big thing that'll start separating it is when we get, and you know what? I just remembered a movie that actually helped a lot too. Scott Pilgrim.
Yes.
Oh.
Scott Pilgrim, while not specifically based on any video game, was very heavily video game influenced. And I think actually might have kind of helped the image because, well, it was a good story that borrowed a lot from video games and was a good movie.
Yeah, it was a good.
Actually, that's a game.
Yes, actually became a film that spawned a fantastic game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think who made it?
I don't know who made the game, but do you mean the movie? Who made the movie?
No. Well, who did make the movie?
Edgar Wright made the movie.
Oh yeah. Who is good?
Yeah.
Very good at
Well,
what
I mean, he's made Edgar Wright has kind of lived in that world. One of my favorite things about Edgar Wright, for those of you who don't know, is the guy that made. You'd probably know him best for as the guy who directed Shaun of the Dead. One of my favorite things is I actually didn't see Shaun of the Dead until it was on DVD. And I actually bought the DVD because it came so highly recommended. I went home and I popped it into my DVD player, and the DVD menu for it is inspired from 18 and 16-bit video games,
Nice.
which I absolutely loved. So
And if I remember right, he's one of the original directors from Spaced, which was which is the show that
that Simon Pegg was on.
Simon Pegg and
That's
Nick Frost.
yeah, Simon Pegg and Nick Frost.
And that had an entire scene in it, which was completely inspired by Resident Evil 2.
Yeah.
Where he's playing Resident Evil 2 because it just came out, and he falls asleep and has like a dream sequence where he's fighting off zombies.
Well, and I think you see a lot more of that as time goes by. Because I think it also comes down to what you associate with yourself. You can be like a video game fan, and it kind of goes back to our previous podcast where you can have something that you enjoy, like a fandom, but it doesn't define you. You still do something else. Because I remember when I was reading up on Shadow of the Colossus, they said that there was an Adam Sandler film. I don't remember which one it was, but that particular video game played an integral role in the movie.
Really?
And it was used as an example for how you can supplant video games or video game themes into films and have it work really well for the story.
Yeah.
And I think it's just going to take time when people grow up and have had these common themes in their lives for such and such amount of time.
I think that's the biggest thing is.
Yeah.
I believe this subject almost feels like it's too early to talk about.
Well,
Yes, it's like I was saying, movies have been around for over 100 years, but when we really start to think of like the high class, the Indiana Jones and the Star Wars and the stuff like that, that happened when the people who grew up with high quality movies started making their own movies. When you get the film hats like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and stuff like that, we just haven't had the time for that to happen with video games yet.
Yeah,
They've only been around for 25 years.
But really, with technology going as fast as it is now, we might see it a lot faster than past.
And I actually think we're pretty close to it. I mean, video games is about a 30-year industry as it is now.
Yeah, but it's the same thing. Like with movies, even it wasn't necessarily a limitation of the technology. It's that technology takes time to pick up.
Yeah.
It wasn't that they didn't have the ability to make movies in 1914. It's that it was so new, nobody gave a shit about it. How many people do you know owned a Commodore 64 or an Amiga or a Jaguar? How many people do you know were playing games besides arcade games back in 1982? You know?
Yeah.
For the most part, the huge affects everyone video game generation, I would say, started in the 90s.
Yeah. And from
obviously,
there, and
before then, playing them, but it wasn't such a mainstream, huge thing outside
it was more of a novelty back then.
Exactly.
It was an industry that was actually dying, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you could compare the arcade to the Nickelodeon.
Yeah, kind of. It was just something that back then it was just something that was, well, first off, it was expensive.
Yeah.
And it was new. And games back then, you really couldn't base anything off them because they were kind of, well, they had no story.
They were simple.
Yeah, they were extremely simple.
And nobody could really see it going anywhere.
So at this stage, it's really just undecided but good outlook.
Yeah, I like to have an optimistic outlook, but considering the video games that I saw when I was a kid, like Super Mario Brothers or Double Dragon, things of that nature, versus the ones, a lot of the ones that I've seen now, it's iffy on how much of a quality increase there's been, but I do believe there has been a quality increase, so yeah, it's about time.
Yeah.
It's just about waiting, and I think it'll get a lot better as time goes by.
So, any final thoughts before we go out?
Well, we have one more question, don't we?
Do we? Well, I just asked that.
Oh, okay. Never mind then.
So yeah, any final thoughts before we go out?
More video game movies, less movies that are trying to be video games.
Oh God, fucking what was that movie? Gamer. Did you ever see that?
I refused to. I'm all for Gerard Butler screaming at stuff, but that just did not seem like it. No. Oh, and freak that.
On the same token, I'd like to see more video games that stop trying to be a movie, Not necessarily like Heavy Rain, as you love to bring up, but like even though I haven't played it, just from what you guys described, Uncharted doesn't seem like it'd sit well with me. I really prefer something like a BioShock, where the game can be cinematic, the game can tell a story, but everything it does is through gameplay.
Yeah.
Gameplay is first and foremost, and the gameplay encompasses and creates the story.
But Alex, we already had Atlas Shrugged.
One day, my objectivist brothers, we shall rise up and do nothing because, fuck
It's
other
the
people.
internet age.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you guys for listening to our second ever episode, a huge milestone, of course.
Woo!
It's next time when we talk about major movie flops and why they happened.
Because we've watched plenty, because we have no thing to do with our lives.
No lie.
We have no life. So I've been Zach.
I've been Alex.
And I've been Evan.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Peace.